Hello, everyone. This is a first of a two-part discussion that we have with modern-day homesteader Moses Woodson from the High Desert Homestead, and he discusses some of the interesting things that makes it both similar and difference between the homesteading lifestyle and the ranching lifestyle. Welcome to Hashknife Hangouts. I'm Kalen. My co-host Brandon is also my father. First time joining us, like, comment, subscribe. Interested in our social media? Look below at our Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter handles. For those returning, thank you for your continued support. And now, moving on, we recently came in contact with a channel that does similar things as us. That channel on YouTube is the High Desert Homestead. The homestead shares projects and a lifestyle similar to our own. They produce videos and share their challenges just like us, only from Arizona. Today, we're joined by a special guest from the High Desert Homestead. Our guest's desire is to help the online community of ranchers, farmers, and homesteaders grow so that there's more information offered and available to educate the country. That's how we came into contact, via YouTube and Facebook. You can find him at Moses A. Woodson on Facebook, High Desert _homestead _AZ, all lowercase on Instagram, and High Desert Homestead on YouTube. All the links will be below. So with that introduction, welcome Mr. Moses Woodson to the Hashknife Ranch channel, and thanks for joining us.
Hey, Moses. Thanks a lot.
Morning. Glad to be here.
So with those initial notes, Moses, is there anything that you'd like to add to our viewers that maybe just that quick intro didn't quite suffice?
Well, one of the things that has been just a passion of ours is getting people back in contact with the way it used to be. I think I was looking at statistics like in 1940 something, there was over half of the country had something to do with agriculture. Almost everybody had some sort of livestock, and just getting people back in to contact with that old way of life is really fulfilling. So that's kind of our passion.
When you researched that, did that include not just livestock, but it seems like to me, and as a kid, which was not that far from the 40s, unfortunately, it was a little bit outside of that, but everybody had a garden, and you don't see that. And it doesn't necessarily mean livestock does it, but it means agronomy of some sort, right?
Agriculture in general.
Okay.
They had something, and even during the wars, I mean, people were, they advertised grow a garden.
Victory garden.
Go back to the victory gardens. Raise chickens, 2 chickens. I think there was an ad said 2 chickens a day, or lay 2 eggs a day, and you can feed your family, breakfast every day. So that'd be a snack for me. But people were encouraged to do those kind of things back then because that was what was sustainable. And today people have gotten away from that.
Yeah, and I think that sustainment was not just for themselves, but it also helped with the war effort. Was a big drive, right? And I mean, that's where it got most of the notoriety and the advertising from. It was a government, not a program, but a government awareness of, hey, you want to help the war effort, you need to help yourself and stay, as sustainable and self-reliant as possible, right?
Yeah. Stop depleting the resources that are on the store shelves and stuff like that, and take care of you and your family.
Yeah. And there were little tricks that people picked up simply because of the expense to it. There was not a lot of money to go around in our part of the country. We're a fairly poor, depressed area. And I know that you come from some of those same areas. I remember my grandpa telling me that they used to cut their coffee that they got, what coffee beans or coffee grounds they could get. They used to cut that with a 50-50 mix of ground wheat because wheat was plentiful here, and it made that go a little further. And he said, God, we hated that, but it's the best we could do to make our coffee stretch. And now that's kind of come full circle, because some of these guys that are, running these coffee kiosks and flavored coffees, they're coming up with, wheat in their coffee as a new blend. Well, that's nothing new. It was done by necessity before.
My great grandmother was an herbist, so there's all types of wild teas and wild chicory and stuff like that she would take and collect up. So she was a survivalist of her time, because she was an herbist. She was treating, illnesses and stuff like that right out of the forest. So it was a way of life, but it was kind of a forced way of life because they had to in order to survive.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah.
Well,
I don't think we see that quite as much here. I don't think we have the diversity of some of the plants. We have plenty. Don't get me wrong, but I mean, like chicory, something that doesn't necessarily grow here well. There's not that much. I think some people do it. Will put it in for types of cattle feed and stuff, specialty type things if they can for their sheep, on a very, very small scale. But who knows that you can find a creek bottom. You've got a headache, you peel a piece of willow branch or willow bark off, and you chew on the inside of that, and it'll take your headache away. A lot of people don't know that, and we're getting further and further away from that, myself included. There's a lot of things I've forgotten that it's a good thing to know. So with your operation, like it is, you're trying to get back to that as a sustainable livestock and a gardening type of operation, simply for survival, right?
Yeah, and if and everybody kind of tongue in cheek for years have been saying, these survivalists, these preppers, they're kind of crazy. But there's a lot of things that have happened in my lifetime where if I hadn't had a garden, if I hadn't raised a hog, if I didn't have chickens, things would have been tight for my family. That's just the way it is. And when you tell people that, they're like, what? We live in a land of plenty. But when things get tight, monies get tight, that hog that you butchered, those eggs that you're collecting, the garden you have out there, it comes down to saving money. You've got to take advantage of what the good Lord gives you, and use it. And that saved us money and helped us get through a rough spot.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. I mean, we used to rely on wild game, and even though we had some cattle, every animal was not necessarily for us. It was a lot of times for sale for someone else, because that's what it took to keep the place going. And so you scrimped, and you shot deer and antelope, and for your own consumption, where your cattle and hogs went for somebody else. And a lot of times we could eat a hog, and certainly chickens are plentiful. You could do that no problem. But we would butcher a hog, but it wasn't all that often that we butchered a big steer or a big dry cow.
Yeah, we grew up on the roadkill list. So we would get 2 a.m. calls, and a cow would be hit, or a bull elk would be hit, or a deer. Some would get hit on the road, and the state patrol would call us, and we would go out there in the middle of the night and salvage what meat we could. But we were feeding collectively like 4 or 5 families off of that. But I grew up eating roadkill. It was just a way of life for us.
Right. Well,
and that's that frugal type lifestyle that I grew up in. That is, it's not necessarily mainstream today.
Yeah, and actually, and in Montana, a number of years ago, they passed a law where it used to be illegal to pick up anything that was hit along the road. Well, now, if you want to, and it's fresh, and you can get a permit to pick that up, they just want to track where it's going, and that people aren't just out shooting things, and saying, oh yeah, I picked this up along the road, and can utilize that meat. So it's kind of come full circle in a different way, for a different, I guess, a different perspective. That it's more now, it's like, well, it's kind of a waste to let that go, so maybe somebody can use it, instead of, boy, there's people that can use that. It's a good thing that's got hit. I mean, it's a whole different way of looking at it. But you know what, it's utilizing something that's there, and it's and obviously you're not eating something necessarily that's so bloodshot that you can't utilize it, but it's there's a lot of it that is utilizable.
Well, and what we couldn't use, our dogs could eat. Even their chickens, they that protein. So it all got used in some capacity.
Sure.
And again, that's kind of the way I was raised. My grandparents come through the Depression, so they saved everything, took advantage of everything. My grandma was out there, picking up stuff on the side of the road that other people thought was,
Yeah.
you know, trash, but she was making something useful out of it. And that's what people need to get back to. We are one of the most wasteful countries on the planet. I've been all over the world, and they do stuff with we look at it and go, well, that's just garbage. It's just trash. But they take and they utilize it and become profitable at utilizing it. And America just, we consume and throw away, consume and throw away.
Yeah, I've said that
It,
many times that we are a consumer society for the most part. There's very few producers, mostly consumers, and the consumerism is only for what it's marketed for, not necessarily what you can use as an aftermarket. So your point is spot on, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think the other thing too is you're talking about a lot of stuff that you grew up with and you understood, and I know you shared with me briefly a little bit that you lived in the Kentucky, Tennessee area originally, which I'm currently in Kentucky, and you learned some things on ranches and some farms that you'd been kind of a hand or help with. What kind of brought you from, I guess, kind of the eastern side of the world for the United States all the way to the West, and what made you decide that you were going to do a homestead specifically?
The first off is the weather.
Yeah.
and we just seen tornadoes all the time. The humidity compared to here in Arizona, and I've lived both places. I've lived in the Four Corners area a lot of my life. The humidity in Tennessee is unbearable, and it's always wet. It doesn't matter if it's a cold wet or a hot wet, it's wet.
Yeah.
And I got kind of tired of that. But land, and I heard you guys talking one day about it. It's really hard to break into an agriculture or a ranching type economy because land is so high. It's hard to get. So when we were looking at land, we found cheap land in Arizona, and that's one of the reasons that we came to Arizona, is because it's cheap. Being cheap, it doesn't have anything on it. It's raw. We haul water and that sort of thing, but the land is cheap. We own it. It's ours. And that's why a lot of people are moving out away from the big cities. In Tennessee, you couldn't buy an acre for less than 50,000. And it's getting worse because they're just building subdivisions everywhere. The farms that I grew up working on are all now subdivisions. And you can't buy anything or do anything.
What?
Yeah,
how many years? How many years did you do that as a help and assisting on the different farms and stuff?
I was fortunate because my family were missionaries, so we got to move around a lot. So I got to see a lot of different ranching and farming backgrounds. I started when I was 14, working on a ranch in southern Colorado. So that's where I learned to cowboy at. And then, I always think back to that Monty Walsh line where he, at the end of the show, he goes, "I've rode from Canada to Texas, and I got paid to cowboy sometimes." He said, that's kind of how I was. I would help out farmers. I would help out ranchers. I'd go catch wild cattle just because I loved it, but I was young then. But that opened a lot of doors for me too. Training horses, helping farmers. In Tennessee, there's not a lot of call for day work. In the Four Corners area, you can pick up branding jobs. You can pick up, mending fences, checking reservoirs, whatever. You can pick that up as day work. Tennessee, not so much. So I've trained horses my whole life, and working on some of these remote ranches. It's just an opportunity to learn a lot of skill sets that most people don't get exposed to.
Yeah.
Is the difference, Moses, where you can't get the day work because of the size of the places in Tennessee versus in the West?
That and it's, relate. And I don't mean that derogatory. It's just, they don't look at their cows. They don't manage their cows. Not a lot of the places that I was around like we do out here. Out here, we're on top of it a lot more. you'll see a lot of bad practices where water's plentiful, where grass is usually plentiful. And then when they have a bad year, it hits them harder because they don't manage it. So they don't want to put forth that money to hire somebody to go check their cows. They don't want to, to go check their fences and things like that. So it's harder. It was hard for me making the transfer from when we lived in Arizona back to Tennessee, because I would see people lose cows on 100 acres. How do you lose a cow on 100 acres when we've got them turned out on thousands of acres out here? So it would blow my mind. So it was a little bit of a culture shock for me in agriculture, because they just weren't putting forth the effort because things were easier for them.
Sure. If you don't have to, you're not going to.
Yeah.
That makes complete sense.
Yeah, tell me a little bit about the homesteading life. When we think about homesteading in our part of the country, it's that you would come out and you would file on 160 acres or a quarter section, and you had to prove up on that or improve it for 2 years, and then it was yours. And I think the homesteads we see today, I think for the most part, I think you're probably fairly typical of the homestead size and what you're doing. Is that am I wrong there, or is that accurate?
There's a wide variety of definitions today, particularly with social media and everybody kind of branding themselves as a homestead.
Yeah.
But the idea behind it is to have enough land to be self-sustainable as we can be in today's society. Raise your own proteins, raise your own, your fruits and vegetables, and be off the grid and out of the rat race as much as you can be. It gets harder and harder all the time. We have a really small place. We have sheep, we have chickens, and we're 3 years in, and I still don't have the infrastructure that I need to take and do everything that I want to do to be self-sustainable. So I'm still in that transition period of I'm having to work off the homestead to build a homestead, so eventually I can be self-sustainable. But that self-sustainable lifestyle, being frugal, saving money, not being reliant upon the system, I think is where the homesteads are going today. They do it on an acre, they do it on 200 acres. It's just a matter of the mindset rather than, okay, this is a homestead and this is what you need.
Yeah, nobody's coming into that with $200,000 to plop down to put everything up and just start living like they want to. You got to work into that, right? So one of the things that occurs to me is as you talk is that you've got these animals and yourself. Everybody requires water, and if you're hauling your water, that is a major investment in time and in expense to get that water to you until you can, I assume at some point you would want to drill a well if you could, but I don't know, in your area, you may be, if you're high desert, you may be a long ways to water too, if you're not close to, some arroyos or some natural springs somewhere. Can you tell us about that?
It's 900 feet on my place to water. So you got to go 900 feet down to get it. And that's roughly around $35,000.
Yeah.
We are planning on a rain catchment, but all that stuff takes time, money, energy, and to do it right. I see a lot of people that start out and go, well, I'll do this and I'll do that. And for me, it's not just about getting it done so I can catch water. It's about longevity. If something were to happen to me, I don't want my wife out there trying to jerry rig something to make it. I want whoever comes in behind me to be able to operate it. So I've got a particular plan in mind. Would I love to drill a well? Yeah. $35,000 to drill a well. You might hit water, you might not.
Yeah, that's on a hope, right?
And yeah. So there are wells around, and I do have friends and and in the community around who have wells that let us have access to it. So if it gets real bad, yeah, we got water. I don't have to haul it as far, but I don't want to exhaust those freebies,
Right.
if you will, until it's a have to situation. So yeah, it's daunting. We have horses and sheep and all hogs and all different kinds of things. So we go through some water, but working off the homestead, I drive to town just about every day doing something for somebody because I'm self-employed. So I pick up water as I go and just keep it coming to the homestead.
That makes sense.
Part of your everyday trip then is what you're doing. That's you're making that not just the trip, but hey, by the way, while I'm doing this, I'll grab some water and bring it home.
100 gallons a day.
Yeah.
Now you've also talked about, obviously, digging a well and getting access to water is more of a specialty skill, but when it comes to homesteading and creating some of the stuff that you guys have been doing on your channel and at your homestead and all that, you kind of have to be, I know we've talked about this, through dialogue on Facebook and email, like you have to be the mechanic, the electrician, the plumber. For us, sometimes it's the vet. I don't know if you have to do that much either, but what are some of those specialty skills that you've had to, what you learned early on and you brought with you, but then also some of those extra skills that you have learned while you've been homesteading over these last couple of years?
Solar's huge. We're off grid. So
Yeah.
I had to educate myself and we're blessed today. I mean, when I think about when I was in school, we had Encyclopedia Britannica. I mean, that's what we had. Today we have supercomputers in our hands. We can take and look up almost anything. And if you spend enough time on there, you can actually get in contact with some really good sources that, know what they're talking about. You have to take and filter through the stuff that's not that good, but it's there. If you put in the time, you can get it. So solar was huge for me to learn. I learned the ins and outs of it, what works best, how to configure a solar system. But through my years of just moving around and being different places, I've had to do a lot of jobs. I've been a carpenter. I've helped wire whole houses, electrician, plumbing. I've worked for several contractors where we did it all. Mechanicing. Today, the cars are harder to work on because they're all electronic. And if you don't have computers, you're just pretty much out of luck. But the older vehicles, carbureted, I can take one apart and put it back together because I had to. I was the only one there and I was the only one that's going to get it done because there was no help. And that's something that people don't realize. When you're remote, you make things work. Necessity is the mother of rednecking. That's what I call it.
Right.
You make it work with what you got until you can do better. And that's kind of how I learned to do a bunch of different things. Working alongside vets. I got to work in a livestock barn when I was in my 20s. We shipped about 3,000 cows every sale. So I was there. If the vet was doing something, I was the kid that they told me to shut up and go away because I asked so many questions. And I tell people, if a kid's asking questions, take and talk to them because that's where they're learning at, and you don't ever know what that kid's going to be when they grow up. I pestered old cowboys. I pestered vets. I mean, if they were doing something, well, why are you doing that? Well, why are you doing this? Why are you doing that? That's how I learned because I wanted that knowledge and I wanted to be able to do it myself.
Yeah.
Yeah. Those are good constructive questions we're asking. I'm sure not just dumb questions that, have no relevance to where it's at. And I kind of grew up the same way. You kept your mouth shut until you were talked to. But if you had some questions that were relevant, those old guys, man, they would tell you everything they knew and tell you stuff that wasn't going on right there in that moment. And those are important things. And things pop into my head sometimes. They're like, man, I haven't thought of that in years. And I remember hearing it from, this guy, and never had to deal with it, but now I do. And that's valuable, very valuable.
Yeah. I was the kind of guy that the first time I ever seen somebody shoe a horse, I was like 12, where I actually was right there. You know, we had horses growing up, but I wasn't right there watching them. And this old cowboy on this ranch, he was shoeing a horse for the next day. We were branding, and he showed me everything. And I'm the kind of person that if I can see it done, I can do it. It may not be as pretty as what you did, but I can do it, and I'll figure it out. And the questions that for kids today, what I always taught my kids is ask why, not just how to do it, but ask why you're doing what you're doing. Why did you do that? And it's the little bitty things. If you know why you did it, you can go back and fix it. You can go back and correct whatever mistake you made. And that's one of the best teachers. Do it. I didn't do that just exactly right. Why? Go back through the process, and then you'll iron it out eventually to where I made a living shoeing horses. And once I got interested in it and he showed me how, then I read every book I could find on horseshoeing. I talked to every fair I could get my hands on. And by the time I was 20, I was shoeing my own horses, and then shoeing other people's horses. And it just went from there. And continued education is key. I don't care if you're a rancher, a farmer, a homesteader, there's new information out there. There's people that through the internet now we're connected. Used to, you had a small community of people, and that was the length of your knowledge because that was all you had around you. Now I can get on here and I can talk to somebody in Australia and they're doing something. I go, oh man, I like that. That goes along with my philosophy of how I do things. And so then I add to my bag of tricks, and it makes you more valuable in your community, and it makes you more efficient at what you're doing at any given task if you'll apply yourself.
Yeah, and I think what you're getting to in a real short thing is you're teaching yourself how to think critically. When you ask the question why, now you're figuring out the mechanics of what's going on there and how I can change it, how I can improve it, what doesn't work. And I can learn just as much by what doesn't work sometimes as what does work to get me to where I need it to work.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely.
Now, is there any skill that you actually picked up recently that you did not anticipate learning or anything? Like you talked about solar, but is there like anything else, or was solar kind of that one skill that you brought on because you were just like, oh wow, we're in Arizona, we got a lot of sun, we got to take advantage of it?
Water conservation.
Okay.
What I didn't know, and I grew up out here, but it's something you don't think about, is the wind dries it out as bad as the sun does.
Yep.
So the way that we have to set up everything on our homestead is all about the opposing wind, so that it doesn't dry stuff out. If you're going to grow something, it's not only got to have shade, it's got to have wind shelter. We had a storm here the other day. We lost one of our garages. We had a portable garage that we had stuff stored in, ripped the top off of it, 70 plus miles an hour. And it was blowing snow. But if you don't have those things sheltered, it can dry it out and tear it up just as much as the sun does. People don't think about the deterioration of just infrastructure due to wind, the stress on it. And you go out here, most of our wind comes from the southwest. The southwest corner of any building is dried out and crumbling, where if you go on the other side of it, it's okay. Right. So that was one thing that now I'm a little bit more of a critical thinker when I go to build a structure, or when I go to plant a tree, or when I go to do something. I'm thinking, okay, wind and shade. So that's something swales, what works good around plants to make them conserve the water that you are putting on them so it doesn't evaporate. Those are things I've really been reading up here lately. I'm just a little bit more informed on.
Okay. Now, something also that, my dad actually helped create some of these questions that I'm asking as well. But one that actually intrigues both of us is, Is there a community of homesteaders as like a resource for any sort of assistance that you guys do? Or are you just kind of out there Googling on your phone, YouTubing, kind of going at it alone? Or do you have actually people to kind of lean on and use as support or mentors while you go through this process?
There's resources. I don't know. I don't want to plug any organization on here,
Yeah.
but Facebook is a really good organization, where people get on there and they have Facebook pages, homesteader, uh, collabs, and where people post questions, and people go to take and find things out. But there are other organizations that have set up kind of like homesteader associations, where they just have from YouTube. YouTube's really good, but it's subjective.
Yeah.
Most of the books and stuff that I took and had when I first got the idea, okay, we're gonna take and we're gonna homestead and we're gonna go out there and do this. That none of that stuff works in Arizona. It works really good in North Carolina and Tennessee and Kentucky, because they have just all kinds of water and all kinds of grass, and that stuff works really good. But for us in Arizona, it doesn't.
Right.
We have to be, half survivalist, half homesteader all the time in the way we go about things. I mean, people think we're crazy, but if we come home with a cup of ice from a to-go cup, it's going in a bucket so that we have that water to put on a plant. And people are like, what are you doing? When we drain our coolers, that water goes into a bucket. And so the mindset's way different from somebody that's on the East Coast that's, trying to take and homestead. They've got it easy compared to us.
There's nothing like hunger and desperation to make you think differently, right?
Exactly. Well, when you have to haul water, we're roughly 40 miles from the nearest small town. And when I say small town, they have a dollar store. And that's about it. 2 gas stations and a dollar store. So when you have to haul water that way, or you have to run to town to go get something, I'm really big on resources. I save everything. I've got every piece of scrap wire, every staple, every screw. If somebody's tearing something down, I'm there. I'll take the screws, the nails, the bolts, the pipe, whatever it is they've got, I'm hauling it to my house, because when you're there working on a project, you don't have time to run the hour and a half, 2 hours to town and back to take and fix that one little thing that's holding you up, when you can go rig something that you've already got because you picked it up just in the daily course of life.
You're getting kind of beyond just the survival portion of what you're doing. How much of your say your chickens, your sheep, are you using as a commodity to sustain yourself instead of just your own use? Do you have stuff for sale for people? Do you go to like a farmer's market? We hear a lot about that, and there are some in some of the towns close to us, and even the smaller towns. But in our situation, it's very difficult to do a half a beef, where people will want select cuts of beef. So it's very tough to do that and sell a whole beef at a time. So we have a different way of doing that. But how about your commodities with your sheep and chickens?
With the chickens, if we have any surplus eggs, there's a local farmers market. We stake and sell those, and that helps pad the feed bill. Sheep, this is going to be our first bunch that's going to take and lamb there on the property. So we haven't had an opportunity to do that, but we have sold hogs. We sell them. We try to sell them at 6 weeks. If once they're weaned and they're done, we try to sell those, and we'll save one to take and butcher out for ourselves. Just keeping that feed bill as low as possible. On the desert, we try to find ways, to keep that feed bill low, because we don't have just a whole bunch of grass. We don't have a whole bunch of stuff where we can just turn them out in there and they'll survive. I mean, once they eat it on the desert, it's gone. You turn horses out on grass, it's gone. and it takes a long time for it to come back. Particularly if we don't get rain. If we get a monsoon, we're pretty good, as long as you keep rotating your pastures and you keep rotating and keeping your stock off of it. Then it'll come back during the monsoons. But if you don't have those rains, you just don't have anything. It's just a lot harder to take and feed.
Now, out of all of the stuff that you have for commodities, what's your primary income for that, and has it had to change over time at all?
I do off-grid consultations for new homesteaders and people coming out here who don't have a clue. We've got a big influx of people coming in from I call them refugees, because they're coming from these states that are they don't want to live there no more, but they come out here and they don't know what they're doing. They don't know how to set up anything, and they haven't done the research. So I'm kind of that link between them and them not making it. I help them set up their solar, water catchment. We build a lot of fence. When I lived in Tennessee, we had an agricultural construction company. So when I moved out here, people needed help with fences. I was like, I can do that. And that's something I talk about quite often. You've got to have more than one income stream. So we'll cut firewood, we'll build a fence, I'll build a deck, whatever somebody needs. I'll take and jump in there, because I've got a wide range of skills, and I can fulfill that need that they have.
Interesting. So I guess that's the other part too. When it comes to failure or success of a homestead, what are kind of the chances for some of those newcomers that, you were once one time, and now you're helping those new guys and new gals as like you said, refugees. We see the same thing in Montana. They're exiting very expeditiously from certain states, and they're either going to succeed or they're not. And so what have you seen when it comes to other homesteaders in terms of that, and what are their chances?
The number one thing is mentality.
Yeah.
If you're not willing to put up with inconvenience, our lifestyle is not convenient. It's not comfortable. When you have to turn your power off before you go to bed and turn it back on when the sun comes up, to take and do anything. We cook a lot outside. That's not convenient when the wind's blowing 30 miles an hour, and just because we're trying to conserve propane. The mentality in today's society, if you don't think inconvenience, they worship at the altar of convenience. You just set 3 seconds at a stoplight too long, and you'll find that out. Mentality's key. You got to have that mentality where, well, if it's tough, so what? If I don't have just everything I need, so what? And get out of that mindset that everything has to be perfect. People will go on YouTube and they'll see somebody do it and they go, well, I did it this way. I was just talking to a lady the other day, and they set up their solar system because that's the way their friend had it. And it was totally wrong for this country. It was totally wrong for their setup. And they had components that melted down because it wasn't set up for what they needed. So people need to get out of that mentality where, okay, maybe it's not perfect, but I can make this work. That's not perfect, but I can make that work. Expectations, preconceived ideas are the number one killer of homesteaders. They have this preconceived idea of how it's going to be, and then it's not that way, and they go, well, we failed. And it's just not that way. You've got to take life as it comes, one day at a time. That's the number one killer of homesteads. And the other is income. Nobody takes and plans enough. I always tell people, have a backup to your backup and a backup to that backup. Don't come out here with one vehicle, one generator, one thing of each. You're going to fail. You've either got to have really deep pockets, or you've got to plan. And it took us right around 2.5 years before we moved on to our property, because I said, we don't have enough stuff. We've got to, and I was working at the time. I was buying stuff before we ever moved there because they just weren't prepared. People are not prepared. I said, I'm not going out there and not having the things that I need in order to do what I need to do. And that's what kills most of them.
Well, and I'm sure
very-
when you started the whole homestead, you guys had a plan to begin with that you were going to follow. Like, how much has that changed based off of, having those multiple backups that you just talked about?
Everything changed. It's all liquid.
Yeah.
It's all fluid. You have these ideas and you go, well, we're going to do this, 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 and this. And when we first started, we were going to build an earth bag structure and we bought the earth bags and we were going to build an earth bag structure. We'd still be trying to build it. I said, no, cut that idea. We're going to build a stick frame. So we built a stick frame cabin, got it built, and me and my wife, she's awesome. She works with me every day. We built that thing in like 3 months, had it done. Whereas the earth bag, we'd have been in the winter still trying to stack earth bags. So there's a lot of ideas when you go to put them into action, they just don't work out. So everything has changed. And then as opportunities come up, you have to be willing to take advantage of those and change your plan in order to take advantage of that opportunity. And that's where a lot of people don't take and follow through, because an opportunity will come up and they go, well, that's not what I planned. Well, who cares? We had a trailer, really nice park model trailer, and we were living in a cab over camper on our property. So you know how big that was. It was really small. We spent our first winter on the property in that. And this camper came up, 40-foot park model trailer, and this lady needed a fence built. And I said, I can build your fence. So she paid for the materials. I did it for the labor. And we had a 40-foot trailer now that we can pull onto our property while we build our house. And it's really nice. It's really comfortable, particularly when you're coming out of a cab over camper.
Yeah.
So now we got more space and it's more luxurious. But I go, well, that wasn't our plan. It was just an opportunity that came up and I took advantage of it. So don't ever get so set in concrete that you can't just flow with it and improve your situation.
Some of those opportunities can be very risky, because you may or may not be able to follow through with it partway through. Is there something that you took a real risk on, thought, oh man, I think it'll work, and went ahead and followed through, and did it work or not work? And how did you adjust to that, if that's what happened?
I'm pretty calculating. I haven't taken and done a whole lot. Last year, we didn't know how well it would do. We ended up selling 30 cords of wood for the winter. And you have big failures, you have small failures. I think our smallest one was trying to take and just keep our cars running, because I didn't calculate how bad the roads were going to be. We've been through 3 cars so far. That's how bad the roads are. So that's kind of a small failure on my part, because I should have come out here with a 4-wheel drive truck with a lift kit on it, whereas we came out in a Chevy Traverse and it killed it. It killed it in just a little while. So that's kind of a small failure. The big failure, I don't really have any big failures, not yet anyway. There's always tomorrow. But I'm kind of calculating, and I try not to get into anything that where if I don't feel good about it, I don't do it. And I have to take time for prayer and think things through, and I try not to get in those situations where I exhaust my overhead and exhaust myself and my family to the point to where now we're in real trouble.
That finishes our first part of this 2-part conversation with Mr. Woodson from the High Desert Homestead. We'll see you next week for the second part of Modern Day Homesteading.